This is a review of the 1956 Anatol Litvak film Anastasia, or possibly Anastasia. It stars Ingrid Bergman as Anastasia, or possibly Anastasia. This is going to be a long video. I got to pick one, I guess. It also stars Yuli Borisovich Brenner, Yul Brenner, and Helen Hayes, the remarkable Helen Hayes that we'll talk about a lot more. She's phenomenal in this movie. Really, all three of the actors and the supporting actors are great. This is another Anatol Litvak film, like I said. I'm quite a fan, and this channel is temporarily becoming it. The Anatol Litvak channel will get back to non-Anatol Litvak content maybe sometime in the next few years. But for now, we've got plenty more movies to see. Now, I think that these are sort of the last of the block of Litvak films for now, although there are some others that I will be coming back to. But we'll try some other things in the interim as well, because I realize maybe not everyone is as much of a fan as I am. But perhaps after these reviews, and maybe if you check out the movies, you would be. It all started with The Snake Pit from 1948. Great movie. I just finished recording a review of Sorry, Wrong Number, also from 1948. Not as good. Interestingly, Sorry, Wrong Number actually has a higher rating on IMDb than this movie, Anastasia. This movie is way better than Sorry, Wrong Number, though. Well, it's at least better. I'm confident in that. There are some interesting reasons, though, why people maybe didn't like it down the years or why it wasn't super popular. I'll touch on some of those. With this movie, I think I'm actually going to tell you what happens in the movie up front, though. Often, I just completely forget to mention this. You see some review channels that are just complete plot summary. On this channel, usually I just completely forget to even talk about what happens in the movie. But here, I think it is a good way to sort of ground what the movie is about, Makes sense. Basically, the idea is that in the Bolshevik Revolution, the Romanov family, who were the Tsars, the Tsar and co. family of Russia, were executed by the revolutionaries. You can check out the movie Nicholas and Alexandra, right? I think is the movie that goes into that, which is an okay movie. I once watched it by accident when somebody got it confused with Fanny and Alexander, the Ingmar Bergman movie. Very different movies, but okay movie. The Nicholas and Alexander, or Alexandra, is a decent American biographical film about this. Anyway, the Tsar and family are executed in Yekaterinburg, I think. But hypothetically, maybe the youngest daughter, or one of the daughters, Anastasia, escapes and finds her way through Europe, has this sort of tumultuous life or whatever, but emerges again in Paris in the 1920s and claims to be the daughter of the Tsar, and claims that and basically some local opportunists who former Russians realized that they could make a buck with this. There's been rumors, there's been legends that Anastasia's still alive, and there's a huge inheritance. So there's a group of people who are basically, they found some company that's sort of staked on finding her and using the inheritance to repay the investors. Okay, that's the movie. So it starts out in Paris in 1928 with one of these people, Yul Brenner, finding this person who might be Anastasia, which is obviously played by Ingrid Bergman. And then it's sort of a big saga of trying to convince various people that she is. But this is a profoundly uncertain movie. And if you've seen any of my reviews, you know that I like uncertain movies. Uncertainty, I think, is a huge virtue in this film, and this movie is just dripping with it. You never learn whether or not Anastasia is, in fact, you never learn whether or not Ingrid Bergman's character, Anna Anderson, is actually Anastasia. The characters who are trying to make money off of her, Yul Brenner's character, for instance, he never knows. Anastasia, Anna Anderson herself, is never actually sure. She has sort of suffered from memory loss, was in hospitals and asylums over the years. She is uncertain about it. And that is sort of one of the profound dynamics of the film, is this deep sense of uncertainty and this deep sense of loss to some degree. And this, I think, echoes a lot of other American movies about Russia. So if you've seen Dr. Zhivago, if you've seen the War and Peace movie from 1956, I haven't seen it, but I think it plays the same game here. There's this sense of it's sort of this sad Russian tragic romance or something that's really linked into loss, some sorrow of things gone. And it's possible that this is Americans sort of projecting some sort of sorrow about communism onto Russian stories. It's also possible that it has much deeper roots in, classic Russian literature. War and Peace, of course, was a book and such. And the sense of time and the sense of change and vast distances, vast time, and vast shifts is obviously a part of War and Peace. I mean, just from the title of the book, you would understand that that's sort of part of it. So maybe this is an inherently Russian thing, or maybe it's a projection of Hollywood. But either way, this movie's got it big time. So this sort of sense of sorrow and loss at something past and gone. Here, it's the Tsar and that sort of Russian society prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, which is kind of interesting. Like I mentioned, this movie came out the same year as King Vidor's War and Peace. This is the one with Audrey Hepburn in it. If you want to watch a movie of War and Peace, you should watch the Sergei Bondarchuk movie, or it's 3 movies or 1, depending on how you find it. But that's an absolutely phenomenal, mind-blowing production of War and Peace that is really, really good. The other maybe Russian movie to check out is, of course, Dr. Zhivago, which came out in 1965. This movie came out in 1956. And there's a big gulf in there. This movie is a melodrama. It is not Dr. Zhivago. It's not anywhere near the quality of Dr. Zhivago, which is a really, really great movie. This is a melodramatic film. It avoids that at times. There's some earnest moments, but it gets caught up in it in other times. Like I said, though, there is real content here. I think the uncertainty is interesting. The dynamic of Yul Brynner's character, for instance, a grifter, all in it for the money. Or is he, right? Somebody who's maybe entranced by the romance of this forgotten, gone time, but also is this opportunist and such. Another interesting element of this is the high cost to Anna Anderson, Ingrid Bergman's character. The cost of putting her through all of this stuff. They essentially send her to Anastasia boot camp, trying to tell her all the facts, all the details of this life that she apparently led and such. And this is, in some ways, revelatory and in some ways torturous for her to try to reconnect with some life that she may or may not have even lived. And again, we have a nice metaphor here for kind of the loss of that era as well. So yeah, high cost Anastasia. This is one of the emotional dynamos of the film, basically, is her being put through the ringer by Yul Brynner and his associates to try to become herself, supposedly, again. And that is a pretty interesting plot line. Talking about style for a minute, Anatol Litvak, again, delivers a pretty impressively put-together movie. This is not a film that throws huge set pieces in your face. A lot of these sort of epic Russian movies do that. War and Peace, the Russian version does that. I'm sure the American version does that. Dr. Zhivago does that. It wants to give you a sense of scale right up front. This movie opens in Paris in 1928, and it does a pretty good job of showing you that and being convincing, but it doesn't open with a huge fanfare. It doesn't open with any huge sets or anything like that, but the movie is extremely competent, I think, in the way that it builds the world for you. There's never a moment where anything seems sort of half-baked. There's never a moment where it seems like you're on a set, or it seems like they're filming around something, or they're doing something to it never seems like they're faking something. And that's pretty impressive. It seems like wherever the movie would want to go, wherever the camera would turn, the world would be there, and it would be set up and established, and it would be convincing, and it would be big. This movie, of course, features a whip pan because it's Anatol Litvak. I think there's just one, but still, we have the whip pan. This movie largely takes place in sort of this old world thing. So like I said, it opens up in Paris. Later on, they go to Copenhagen. Like I said, they do an impressive job of sort of portraying this. Maybe some expert on Copenhagen would point out, no, they screwed it all up. But at least to the casual observer, it more or less fits together. I should also mention, I'll get back to this a little bit later. There's plenty of things that a history buff might not appreciate about this movie, but I will touch on those more explicitly in a moment. The other thing that's interesting about the old world thing, though, is sort of the social network of this time. So there's a lot of characters that are essentially Russian expatriates who had some sort of title or some sort of role in that society and are now dispersed across these other sort of great old world cities and such. Some of them are in Paris, some of them are in Copenhagen. They bump into each other, they see each other. And it's just kind of interesting to see. You get a pretty vivid sense of like this network where it is like that, the relationships that people have with each other, the connection between the nodes, the edges, you might say, are really the essence of that society. That's what's left, is that these people can recognize each other and can see each other and can still act a certain way towards each other in a world where things are changing and where those, traditions are being forgotten and such. Again, we have this sort of sorrow of the passage of time in the movie. Ironically, at one point, one character, the Dowager Empress, who we meet in the film, played by Helen Hayes, which I'll talk about quite a bit longer, points out that it all makes great material for melodrama, which is kind of interesting because, like I said, this movie is a bit of a melodrama, but this is also, I think, a fairly interesting movie and a fairly well put together movie that does have some real earnest moments in it, does have some great acting. Some other interesting things, there's a scene in particular where there's a bunch of reporters get involved in the plot at one point for one reason or another, and the reporters seem to come from a completely different world. And this is a nice moment because it really hammers home this idea of the sort of lost Russian time, which the Dowager Empress also talks about this, how she is totally ingrained in the past and is a part of it and is happy with that, but how it ain't a life for anyone younger or anything like that. The past, the tradition, the network, or the traditions and the network of the past and such, the culture, everything, is pretty vividly contrasted with this scene of the reporters who, this is a movie set in the 20s, who seem fairly modern, whatever. They're wearing sort of tweed suits and such. They seem, they've got cameras and whatnot. It seems like the new world to some degree. And that's a pretty interesting moment. In general, this is an interesting time. When this movie was made, this movie was based on a true story to some degree. There was a woman named Anna Anderson who claimed to be Anastasia, and she would have been alive when this movie was made. And in fact, in the beginning of it, the opening crawl says only Anna Anderson will know whether or not the story depicted here is true or not. And it turns out that when they were making the movie, they didn't know that she was alive, apparently. Which, so like I said, it's they make the movies in the 50s, but even then in the 50s, it's still not an exact science. There's still not the Wikipedia that we have today to look all these things up and figure out exactly what's going on. There's still so much uncertainty about people's identity and such. So there was a period of time where there was a great debate as to whether or not this woman was Anastasia, and then when the movie about it was made, people didn't even know if she was alive, right? And that really opens your eyes to a different period of time. And again, the uncertainty of it all, the uncertainty of the social network and the world depending on this. It would seem like, how the heck could people not know whether somebody was Anastasia? How could they not be aware of this? But you see, I think, the frailty in that society to some degree, which is a really interesting perspective on it, because in a lot of other times when you see movies about empires, you see strength, you see conviction and such. But this is a movie about frailty, about the bonds fraying, about people not being sure if they're speaking to a loved one, if they're speaking to a family member and such. And like I said, we're just doubling down again on this sorrow of the passing time and such, which is interesting. So there's a bunch of points that I sort of shoved into one there. But I think it all comes back to uncertainty in the end, and I like that. Helen Hayes plays the Dowager Empress in this movie. If you don't know who Helen Hayes is, you should look her up. She won an Oscar in 1931 and in 1970. So 2 Academy Awards, 39 years apart. That's pretty interesting. Her second Academy Award was Best Supporting Actress, Best Actress in a Supporting Role or whatever, when she appeared in the 1970 movie Airport. A quick divergence is I would just strongly recommend that you go check out the movie Airport because it's great. I think some people assume that the movie Airport is not very good for maybe 2 reasons. One is because of the movie Airplane, which is not really a direct spoof of Airport, but sort of is. Maybe people assume that it's more goofy than it actually is. Also, Airport spawned a bunch of sequels and such, which I think did decline in quality fairly significantly. But the original, Airport from 1970, is a great movie, and Helen Hayes is really, really good in that movie, playing an old woman who basically sneaks onto airplanes and rides for free. Airport definitely was set in a pre 9/11 time. But her character in that is phenomenal. Great actress, great performance in that movie. And she deservedly got an Academy Award for this. In this movie, she is incredible. So Helen Hayes was mainly a theatrical actor. She, in addition to winning 2 Academy Awards, also won an Emmy, a Grammy, and a Tony. And she had got a Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1986. That is quite a resume. So definitely an esteemed actor. One minor asterisk is that in 1986, she got this Presidential Medal of Freedom from Ronald Reagan, which maybe gives you a little bit of a more sense of why some random actress might be receiving such an award. And there's one other caveat, which is that Helen Hayes was a notable conservative in Hollywood at the time, along with Reagan when he was an actor in Hollywood. So not to say that she didn't deserve anything or something, but you can see a little bit of a connection they had there. Anyway, point is, Helen Hayes, phenomenal actress, and she's incredible in this movie. She's, I think, the best actor in this movie by far. Ingrid Bergman actually did get an Academy Award for this movie, I think, and she does a pretty good job in the movie. Yul Brynner is good, as usual, playing his sort of Yul Brynner self. But Ingrid Bergman maybe has a reputation to some degree as a pretty face or something like that, but was a good actress. And she does a pretty good job in this movie, but the best acting by far, like I said, Helen Hayes, phenomenal actress, totally steals the show as the Dowager Empress in this movie. Incredible performance. And that includes capping off the film with an amazing final line. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but the very end of the movie is great. And the last line in it is great. And Helen Hayes takes it home with a phenomenal performance all the way through and a great line there. Sadly, Helen Hayes wasn't really in a ton of powerhouse Hollywood films. She was mainly an actress on stage. The movie that she won her first Academy Award for, the Sin of Madeline something, Sote or something like that. I forget exactly what it's called. Came out in 1931. I think it was a sound film. I might check this out at some point. I've never seen that. Wasn't in a ton of big movies exactly, or in a ton of movies that have stood the test of time, let me put it that way. But has had some good performances. This is definitely one of them. I think worth watching this movie just to see her in it. She's really great. Tons of great lines. Just nails it. In some ways, maybe the character of the Dowager Empress is kind of easy to play in some degree. You kind of know what she's supposed to be like, but there's so much nuance in her role. It is really incredible. And there's a couple of scenes where you put her together with Ingrid Bergman, put them on stage essentially and let them go, and they just really take it home. So overall, I mean, this is a pretty good movie. Like I said, yeah, it's a melodrama, but it's a pretty good period piece. It's got nice style. It's got pretty good sets. It's got, pretty good costume. It sells the look. The style's nice. It's a fluently made movie again. The acting is really good. The story had some real substance to it with this uncertainty and with this sorrow. It's definitely got a vibe, and such. Like I said, the last line is great. So why would it be rated less than the Sorry Wrong Number film that I just finished reviewing that I think is clearly not as good? Well, one thing that sort of marred this movie to some degree is that it's not historically accurate. And it's true that it's not just a cockroach flew. Good thing I'm moving. Anyway, it's true it's not historically accurate. The movie opens up saying it may or may not be true, and so I don't think it totally sinks the ship. But people may have been somewhat vindictive in their appraisal of it, given a certain historical fact, which is that Anna Anderson was proven to be not Anastasia. I think this would have been after the movie came out. I'm not sure. That does change a little bit on that. But if you're coming at it from a pure historical perspective, yeah, we know now, based on DNA testing, that she wasn't Anastasia. So, okay, fair enough. And that DNA testing thing sort of flies completely in the face of everything that I was just saying about this network and this romance of it all. And so you could be totally put off by this sort of romantic angle of like, oh, she could be. Oh, but dare to dream that she might be this lost, Duchess or whatever. Well, okay, if you're saying, okay, hold on a minute, we know that she wasn't, then I could see how this whole movie might just seem like kind of a useless exercise, kind of a useless romantic exercise or something like that. So maybe this is one of the reasons why it wasn't as successful. It's possible that it also lives in the shadow of other sort of Russian movies possibly War and Peace, or probably Dr. Zhivago, which is a better movie, although it came out later. So I can kind of see to some degree why it didn't totally hit it home. It's also a somewhat understated movie in some ways. This is not a big adventure film, which maybe people were expecting some sort of historical epic to have a bunch of sword fights in it. This movie absolutely does not. So that's my theory as to why it's rated a lowly 7.1 on IMDb. But nonetheless, I would recommend you check out the 1956 Anatole Litvak film. I'm still eyeing the cockroach out of the corner of my eye here. Anastasia, a nice movie, for all the reasons that I just went through. Okay, now I gotta kill the bug.